Huge Evercade news dropped today, and that big news is, of course, I'm talking about dip switches. Hello, gamers, just coming at you today with some quick Evercade news. Let's check this out. Got a news release here from Evercade. I'm just going to read it off. Evercade features update March 2025. Latest Evercade firmware update brings with it a number of new features. As always, please see the patch notes for full details and contents of the update, and we'll take a closer look at some of the best new features of this update. Taking the place of the Game of the Month program for this year will be the highlight of the month. An opportunity to explore some classics from the Evercade back catalog without needing to insert or even own the cartridge that the game is on. This gives Evercade newcomers the chance to try out some games from earlier cartridges they might not have played before. The veterans the opportunity to revisit titles they've not touched for a while. Like with Game of the Month, we'll be posting an in-depth blog about the game in question so you can find out a bit more about its history, some hints on how to play it, a few fun facts too. Highlight of the month begins with the 16-bit home console port of Midnight Resistance from the Data East Collection 1. Broken Sword, cartridge coming out soon. It's going to get multi-language support. This is the big one though. The dip switch support beta. Features in the beta phase will be improved and refined over time. Features not available on the Hyper Mega Tech Super Pocket devices or the original Evercade handheld. As mercenary as it sounds, arcade machines were designed to make money for arcade owners. That's why when you look at the flyers of old games, you often see them talking about profit, collections, and earnings. Such as this example from Data East's Sly Spy seen to the right. Then the actual quality of the features of the games themselves. Both arcade operators and game designers have a careful balancing act to follow though. Making a game too easy and income from the game will be down, because fewer players will be spending longer on the machine, therefore spending less money. Make it too hard though and no one will want to play it, which will also cause the game to be less profitable than it could be. Because different arcades have different needs, many arcades machines had a hidden customization options which allowed operators to tweak how the machine worked. If their regulars were particularly skilled players, the operators could jack up the skill level, ensure they always had a good challenge. If the audience was more casual, they could drop the difficulty or make the games more generous about giving out extra lives. On home computer and console games, this sort of functionality is typically handled through a user-facing options menu, so the player can player can adjust the game to their liking. In arcades, these options needed to be hidden from players, and as such, in a lot of cases, they were handled with physical switches on the arcade board known as dip switches. Dip, if you were wondering, comes from the electronics term dual inline package. Since the actual arcade board was kept in a locked part of the cabinet, these settings could only be accessed by the arcade staff by the appropriate keys. Switches had to be set before the machine was turned on, and they looked something like this. Just some pictures, some dip switches. Exact function of dip switches varies according to the machine in question. Some arcade machines didn't have them at all, instead providing access to game options via other means. More commonly, they can be used to control the overall game difficulty, the number of lives the player is given per credit, and the score boundaries at which the player earns extra lives. In some cases, they can provide access to a debug settings intended for testing the game easier, such as infinite lives or even complete invincibility. In others, they allow customization of game-specific options, such as whether there is music and sound during the attract mode, or functions such as continuing are limited depending on the game progress. To access the dip switching settings supporting games on Evercade, insert the arcade cartridge and select the game. Navigate to the ellipsis, the three dots, menu on the right of the play and last save options of the D-pad. Press A. The game option page is where the other settings such as remapping controls, giving a credit limit, and arcade games or resetting play statistics will appear. Move down to the dip switch setting with the D-pad and press A. Note that not all arcade games support dip switch settings for various reasons. So if this option does not appear, the arcade game does not support this feature on Evercade. Some games, such as the Capcom games and the Evercade Alpha, which originally ran on CPS2 hardware, handle game settings via different means, which we will add support for at a later time. Other unsupported games either did not have dip switch settings at all, or only dip switches that are not relevant to playing the game on the Evercade, such as diagnostic features or controlling the number of physical coins needed per credit. Selecting dip switch settings from the ellipsis menu, ellipsis? Is that how you say that? From the ellipsis menu will bring up options available for the game that you have selected. Note that each game has its own set of dip switch settings. Not all games support changing the same options. For example, in the dip switch settings for Alcon, Toplin Arcade 1, pictured below, you can adjust the number of lives per credit, the score boundaries at which the player earns an extra life, and the overall difficulty of the game. In Rodland from Jailco Arcade 1, meanwhile, you can select the number of lives, choose whether the game starts on its first or second episode by default, and adjust the overall difficulty. Some games may have multiple difficulty settings that do different things, like several of the Capcom games on the Mega Man edition of the Evercade Alpha are a good example. For example, one switch might control how much health the enemies have or how much damage the player attacks do, while the others control how many enemies can appear at once. Unfortunately, even the original operators manuals for these arcades didn't usually give specifics about exactly what the multiple difficulty switches change, so you'll have to experiment to see what feels good for your skill level. You can customize each game as you see fit, though not all games support dip switches. And of course, those settings are only available for arcade games on the purple line of Evercade cartridges. Notably, several Capcom games built in with the Evercade EXP, white and limited edition consoles, and Evercade Alpha devices, specifically those that run on the CPS2 hardware originally, handle game settings in a different way without using dip switches. We'll be adding support and customizing these settings at a later date. Some games that currently do not support dip switches may also have support added in a later update, but others simply do not have any options that affect gameplay. The following arcade games do not presently support dip switches, and there's a list here. Bad Dudes vs. Dragon Ninja, Chain Reaction, Snowboard, Crystal Castles, Pong, Steel Force, Ultimate Tennis Fixate, Peter Pepper's Ice Cream Factory, Joe Mac Returns, Twin Brats, Bang, 1944 The Loot Master, Street Fighter 2, Street Fighter Alpha, Street Fighter Alpha 2, Street Fighter Alpha 3, Street Fighter 2 Turbo, Mega Man, The Power Battle, and Mega Man 2 The Power Fighters. If you have applied custom dip switch settings to a game, the game information page will indicate this above the game description. If you wish to reset all dip switches for a game to the default values, open the dip switch settings page as explained above, then press Y. You'll be asked to confirm your decision. Follow the on-screen button prompts and confirm or cancel. Note that because dip switches had to be set before an arcade machine was turned on, you can only adjust dip switch settings before starting a game on the Evercade. If you want to change the dip switch settings, exit the game, make your changes, and start it up again. Be aware that competition mode will reset dip switch settings to their default values. And that's dip switches. We hope you have fun tinkering with your arcade games, those purple carts. Perhaps some of these settings may even make those elusive one credit clears a little bit easier to accomplish. And then it says to get started with this feature, update to the latest firmware. But opening the settings menu, cog icon on the left of the main Evercade menu, navigating the system menu, and choosing check for update. Once the update is applied, dip switch settings will be available for supported games under the ellipsis menu as outlined above. I hope this explains everything you'd ever want to know about dip switches on the Evercade. If you enjoyed this video, smash that thumbs up button, consider subscribing to the channel, and as always, stay legit.